The question that changed everything. What makes a home? Let me ask you something quietly, almost like a whisper in your own mind. Have you ever stood in a room full of furniture, lights, a refrigerator humming in the background, and still felt completely homeless inside? Not because you had no roof. Not because you had no job. But because something invisible was missing. When I first moved to the United States, I thought a home was simple. A place. An address. A lease agreement with my name printed in bold black letters. I remember holding those keys in my hand for the first time. Small, cold, metallic. I told myself, this is it. This is the American dream beginning. But that night, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The heater clicked on and off. Outside, snow pressed against the window like a silent observer. And suddenly, I asked myself, very softly, is this really home? If you are learning English right now and feel tired, distracted, almost ready to quit, I understand you more than you think. Because when I arrived in America, English felt like that empty apartment. It looked complete from the outside. But inside, I didn't feel connected. At work, people spoke fast. So fast that my brain felt like it was buffering. You know that feeling when someone laughs and you laugh too, but you don't actually know why? That was me. Every day. There's something psychologists call cognitive overload. It happens when your brain receives too much new information at once, new language, new culture, new climate, new expectations. Your nervous system goes into survival mode. It doesn't say, let's grow. It says, let's escape. That's why so many people quit learning English. Not because they are lazy. Not because they are incapable. But because their brain is overwhelmed. And an overwhelmed brain prefers comfort over growth. I remember standing in a grocery store during my first week in the U.S. staring at 20 different types of milk. Almond milk. Soy milk. Oat milk. Whole milk. 2%. Fat-free. Organic. My brain froze. Back home, milk was just milk. In that moment, I didn't feel adventurous. I felt small. Have you ever felt small in a new place? The winter made it harder. The cold in America, at least where I lived, was different. It wasn't just weather. It was silence. People stayed inside. Streets emptied early. The sky turned gray at 4:30 p.m. And when the sun disappears early, your motivation sometimes disappears with it. There's research showing that seasonal changes affect mood. Less sunlight can lower serotonin levels, which influences energy and optimism. I didn't know the science back then. I just knew I felt heavy. And when you feel heavy emotionally, learning a new language feels twice as heavy. So I stopped practicing for a while. I told myself I was too busy. But the truth? I was afraid. Afraid of sounding wrong. Afraid of not being understood. Afraid that maybe I didn't belong here at all. Belonging. That word became important later. But at the time, I didn't even have the vocabulary to explain what I was feeling. One night, sitting alone in that apartment, I asked myself again, what makes a home? Is it furniture? Is it stability? Is it citizenship papers? Is it perfect English? Or is it something else? I realized something uncomfortable. I had built walls, but not connection. I had built routines, but not meaning. I was surviving in America, but I wasn't living in it. That's when I made a small decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a motivational speech in the mirror. Just something simple. I started telling my own story out loud. In English. Slowly. Very slowly. At first, it sounded awkward. My name is, pause. I moved here because, pause. I feel, long pause. But something changed. When you tell your own story, your brain activates emotional memory. Neuroscience shows that stories engage multiple areas of the brain, language centers, sensory regions, emotional circuits. That makes learning stick deeper than memorizing vocabulary lists. Instead of studying random sentences, I spoke about my real life. The cold winter. The grocery store confusion. The silence at night. My hopes. My doubts. It wasn't perfect English. But it was real English. And real is powerful. Slowly, that empty apartment began to feel different. Not because the furniture changed, but because I changed inside it. I began to see America not as a test I had to pass, but as a chapter one was writing. Let me tell you something important. A home is not built in one day. And confidence is not built in one lesson. Both are built through repetition. Through showing up. Through small, imperfect attempts. When you practice listening, reading, and speaking English through stories, especially your own story, you are not just learning grammar. You are building identity. And identity is the foundation of belonging. That winter, I didn't know yet that love would enter my life. I didn't know that marriage, family, and children would later redefine everything I believed about home. I didn't know that the question what makes a home would follow me through seasons of joy and seasons of doubt. All I knew was this. I didn't want to live like a visitor anymore. I wanted to belong. And belonging begins when you stop hiding your voice, even if that voice shakes. So tonight, if you feel tired of practicing, if you feel embarrassed when you speak, if you feel like giving up, maybe the real question is not is my English good enough? Maybe the real question is, what kind of home are you building inside yourself? Because before I built a home with love, I had to build courage in silence. And that was the first brick. Alone in a new country. Airports are strange places. They are full of motion, but inside you can feel completely still. I remember landing in the United States with 2 suitcases, 1 backpack, and a heart that was half excitement, half fear. If you had looked at me that day, you might have seen confidence. But inside, I was asking the same quiet question again, where is home? The first weeks in America felt like living inside a movie without subtitles. People smiled and said, "How's it going?" And I froze for half a second every time. Was that a real question? Did they want details? Or was it just a greeting? I learned quickly that American communication is fast, friendly, and efficient. At work, meetings started exactly on time. Emails were short and direct. People said, "Let's circle back," and "We need alignment," and I nodded like I understood everything. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I absolutely did not. There's a concept in psychology called imposter syndrome. It's when capable people secretly believe they don't belong. That was me during my first months. Even when I did my job well, even when colleagues complimented me, a voice inside whispered, "You're just lucky. They will discover you don't belong here." And when you feel like you don't belong, everything becomes heavier. The climate was different too. I moved to a region where winters were long and sharp. The air felt dry, almost metallic. Back home, seasons were softer, more predictable. Here, snowstorms could change plans overnight. Schools closed. Roads shut down. Life paused. Climate affects culture more than we realize. In colder states, people often plan activities indoors. Social life happens behind closed doors. You need invitations. You need connection. And when you're new, you don't always have that. I remember one Saturday in January. Snow covered everything outside. I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching neighbors shovel their driveways. They waved politely, but we didn't talk. In that moment, I felt like I was living in a beautiful painting, one that I couldn't enter. Loneliness is not loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, "You're doing fine," while quietly draining your energy. Studies show that social isolation can increase stress hormones like cortisol. When cortisol rises, your brain prioritizes survival over creativity. And guess what language learning requires? Creativity. Risk-taking. The courage to make mistakes. No wonder my English felt stuck during that time. At work, policies were clear and structured. There were rules about health insurance, retirement plans, taxes, and documentation. Everything had a system. I admired that. But as an immigrant, paperwork felt like a maze. Visa renewals. Employment verification. Deadlines. One small mistake could create big consequences. Responsibility makes you mature fast. There is no space for emotional drama when your legal status depends on deadlines. And yet, at night, emotions returned. I would sit on the couch, laptop open, practicing pronunciation softly. Home. Belong. Future. I repeated these words like they were small prayers. You see, language is not just vocabulary. It is access. Access to conversations. To friendships. To love. To opportunities. But here's something interesting. Research on second language acquisition shows that emotional safety dramatically improves learning speed. When you feel safe, your brain releases dopamine, which strengthens memory pathways. When you feel anxious, your brain narrows focus and blocks new information. That explained everything. I wasn't bad at English. I was anxious. I wasn't incapable. I was overwhelmed. Once I understood that, I stopped attacking myself. Instead of saying, "Why am I so slow?" I began asking, what would make me feel safer? The answer was simple, but not easy. Connection. So I made one small change. Every week, I forced myself to have one real conversation. Not about work. Not about tasks. Just human conversation. It could be with a coworker, a neighbor, or even a barista. At first, it felt awkward. My sentences were short. My accent was obvious. But something magical happened. People were kind. Americans, in my experience, appreciated effort more than perfection. They cared less about grammar and more about sincerity. That realization cracked something open inside me. Maybe home wasn't about perfect fluency. Maybe it was about participation. The more I showed up imperfectly, the less alone I felt. One evening, after a long day at work, I walked into my apartment and noticed something different. It wasn't the furniture. It wasn't the temperature. It was me. I had survived another week. I had spoken. I had tried. I had stayed. Resilience doesn't look dramatic. It looks like showing up again tomorrow. And slowly, very slowly, America stopped feeling like a test I had to pass. It began feeling like a place I was allowed to grow. But growth is uncomfortable. And just when I started to find stability, something unexpected entered my life, something that would completely change how I defined home. I didn't know it yet, but the next season would bring more than language practice and work deadlines. It would bring love. And love, especially across cultures, asks even deeper questions. What happens when two different worlds try to build one home? Work, pressure, and silent nights. There's a particular kind of silence that only exists after 10 p.m. on a weekday in America. The highways calm down. Office lights turn off one by one. And you sit there, in a small apartment, staring at your laptop screen, wondering if this is success, or just survival with better Wi-Fi. When I started working full-time in the U.S., I believed productivity would solve everything. If I worked hard enough, spoke clearly enough, proved myself enough, I would finally feel at home. That was the deal I made with myself. Work culture in the United States is efficient, direct, results-focused. People respect your time, but they also expect you to respect deadlines. There's pride in independence. Figure it out is often the unspoken rule. At first, I admired that. I still do. But admiration and adaptation are two different things. During meetings, conversations moved quickly. Decisions were made fast. People used phrases like, "Let's be proactive," or "We need ownership here." I understood the words individually. But emotionally? I felt like I was running slightly behind the group. Have you ever tried to run in heavy boots while everyone else is wearing sneakers? That was my brain. Cognitive science explains this well. When you operate in a second language, your brain uses more energy for processing. Even if you're fluent, you're still translating cultural cues, tone, humor, and context. That extra mental effort leads to fatigue faster than you expect. By 6 p.m., I wasn't just tired. I was mentally drained. And drained people don't build homes. They collapse into couches. At night, the apartment felt larger than it was. The refrigerator hummed. The heater clicked. Sometimes I turned on the TV just for background noise, not because I was watching. Silence can amplify doubt. I began asking harder questions. Is this worth it? Did I move too far from everything familiar? Am I building something meaningful, or just chasing a version of success I don't fully understand? There's also a cultural difference in how emotions are expressed. In many parts of the U.S., people are friendly and optimistic. You've got this. No worries. Awesome. The positivity is real, but it's fast. Efficient. Encouraging. But sometimes, when you're deeply tired, you need slower comfort. You need someone to sit with your confusion, not solve it in one sentence. That's when loneliness becomes heavier, not because you're isolated, but because you're misunderstood. Research shows that humans need emotional mirroring. When someone reflects your feelings back to you, your nervous system calms down. Without that, stress lingers. During that period, I didn't yet have someone who fully mirrored me. Friends were kind. Coworkers were supportive. But I still carried parts of myself quietly. And that quiet pressure began to shape my relationship with English. Instead of speaking freely, I started overthinking. Before sending emails, I reread them 5 times. Before answering questions, I rehearsed in my head. Perfectionism slowly entered. Perfectionism is sneaky. It disguises itself as responsibility. But underneath, it's fear. Fear of sounding wrong. Fear of being judged. Fear of not belonging. Ironically, perfectionism slows language growth. Studies on language acquisition show that learners who tolerate mistakes improve faster. Those who aim for flawless speech often speak less, and progress less. I was speaking less. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to say it imperfectly. One evening, after a particularly long workday, I walked home under a pale winter sky. The air was cold enough to make breathing sharp. I remember stopping for a moment and looking at the rows of houses lining the street. Warm lights glowed behind curtains. Families were inside. Laughter probably echoed in kitchens. I asked myself again, quietly. What makes a home? Is it stability? Is it shared meals? Is it someone waiting for you? Or is it the feeling that you can exhale completely when you step inside? I realized something uncomfortable that night. I had built structure. I had built discipline. I had built professional credibility. But I hadn't yet built emotional safety. And emotional safety is the foundation of love. Without it, even a beautiful house feels temporary. That realization didn't solve everything immediately. It didn't magically remove pressure at work. It didn't suddenly make English effortless. But it shifted my focus. Instead of trying to prove myself constantly, I started asking a different question. How can I build a life here, not just a resume? That subtle change opened space for something unexpected. Because when you stop chasing validation, you become more open to connection. And connection often arrives quietly. I didn't know it then, but someone was about to enter my life, not as a solution, not as a rescue, but as a mirror. Someone who would challenge my definitions of strength, success, and home. Love doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes, it begins with a simple conversation on an ordinary day. And that conversation would change everything. When love entered quietly. Love did not arrive with dramatic music or cinematic timing. It arrived on a normal Tuesday afternoon, under fluorescent office lights, between deadlines and coffee refills. If you expect grand entrances, you might miss the most important people in your life. I met him during a collaborative project at work. We were assigned to the same small team. He spoke calmly. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. The kind of voice that doesn't rush you. The kind that makes space. In the beginning, our conversations were simple. Did you review the file? Yes, I did. What do you think? I think we need one more example. Professional. Polite. Efficient. But here's what I noticed. When I searched for words, he didn't interrupt. When I paused, he waited. When I mispronounced something, he didn't correct me publicly. He listened for meaning, not mistakes. And that changed everything. There's a concept in neuroscience called psychological safety. It refers to environments where people feel safe to speak without fear of humiliation. Research shows that psychological safety increases creativity, collaboration, and learning. I didn't know the term at that time. I just knew I felt calmer when he was around. One afternoon, after a long meeting, we walked out of the building together. It was early spring. Snow had melted, but the air was still cool. He asked casually, "How are you adjusting to life here?" It was a normal question. But it wasn't small talk. For the first time in months, I answered honestly. "It's beautiful," I said. "But sometimes it feels quiet." He didn't laugh. He didn't offer quick solutions. He just nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It can be like that." That moment felt small. But it was powerful. When someone validates your experience without trying to fix it, your nervous system relaxes. Studies show that emotional validation reduces stress responses in the brain. You feel seen. And being seen is the first brick in building love. We started talking more. About weather differences. About family traditions. About food. He grew up in a different region of the United States than where we were living. Even within one country, cultural differences exist. In his hometown, summers were humid and loud with cicadas. In mine, seasons felt different, slower. We laughed about misunderstandings. I once confused a casual American expression and responded too seriously. He smiled and explained gently. I learned. Not through embarrassment. Through warmth. Love, I realized, is not just romance. It's interpretation. It's choosing to understand someone's intention beyond their imperfect words. As weeks passed, our conversations moved beyond work. We talked about values. About what family meant. In American culture, independence is highly respected. Many young adults move out early, build individual careers, prioritize personal goals. In my background, family closeness was central. Decisions often involved everyone. These differences could have created distance. Instead, they created curiosity. Why does that matter to you? He would ask. And I would explain. Explaining your culture in another language forces clarity. You must simplify complex emotions into understandable words. And in doing so, you understand yourself better. One evening, after staying late to finish a project, we walked to the parking lot together. The sky was soft pink. I remember feeling a strange calm. Not excitement. Not fireworks. Just steadiness. He turned to me and said, "You know, you're braver than you think." I laughed. Why? Moving to another country. Building a life from scratch. That's not small. No one had framed my struggle as bravery before. In psychology, this is called reframing. When someone offers a new perspective on your experience, it can reshape your identity. Instead of seeing yourself as inadequate, you begin to see yourself as resilient. That sentence stayed with me. Maybe I wasn't behind. Maybe I was building something quietly. Love didn't suddenly erase my doubts about English. I still searched for words. I still felt tired after long days. But now, I had someone who didn't measure me by fluency. He measured me by intention. We began spending time outside of work. Coffee shops. Walks in the park. Conversations about future dreams. Slowly, the question "what makes a home?" started changing shape. Maybe home is not a location. Maybe home is the person who listens when you speak slowly. But love across cultures is not always easy. Differences that feel charming at first can become challenging later. Values. Expectations. Communication styles. Even humor. And soon, we would face conversations that were much harder than small talk about weather. Because loving someone is one thing. Building a life together in America, with its systems, policies, responsibilities, is another. And that's when the real test begins. Two cultures, one conversation. Love is easy in coffee shops. It's softer in spring sunlight. It feels natural when conversations are about music, childhood memories, favorite foods. But real love begins when two people start asking, what does the future look like? And when you come from two different cultural backgrounds, that question is not simple. One evening, we sat at a small wooden table in his apartment. Outside, summer had arrived. Windows were open. Warm air carried distant sounds of traffic and laughter from neighbors. It should have felt light. Instead, the conversation felt heavier. "What does marriage mean to you?" he asked gently. It's a simple sentence, but it carries history. In American culture, marriage often emphasizes partnership between two individuals, independence within togetherness. In my background, marriage felt larger. It included extended family, shared responsibility, deep interconnection. I paused before answering. "It means commitment," I said slowly. "Not just emotionally, but practically. Family. Stability. Long term." He nodded. "For me, it means choosing each other. Every day." At first, those answers sounded similar. But underneath, they carried different expectations. Cultural psychologists explain that Western cultures often prioritize individual autonomy, while many other cultures emphasize collective identity. Neither is right or wrong. But when two people try to build one life, these differences surface. We began having what I now call slow conversations. Not arguments. Not debates. But patient exploration. How would we handle finances? Would we live close to his family? How often would we visit mine? What traditions would we keep? If we had children, how would we raise them? These conversations required more than vocabulary. They required emotional fluency. And here's something important about language learning. When you discuss meaningful topics, your brain retains language more deeply. Emotional relevance strengthens neural connections. So even though these talks were challenging, they also strengthened my English naturally. I wasn't memorizing phrases. I was expressing values. But expressing values in a second language is vulnerable. You worry that you might not explain yourself clearly. That your meaning might be misunderstood. One night, I tried to explain why family closeness mattered so much to me. My sentences were imperfect. I searched for words. I stopped and restarted. He listened carefully. Then he said something that changed the direction of our relationship. "I don't need perfect grammar," he said. "I need honesty." That sentence felt like oxygen. Love across cultures requires translation, not just of language, but of assumptions. You must translate expectations, fears, habits. And translation takes effort. There were moments of tension. Small misunderstandings. Once, he interpreted my silence as disagreement. In my culture, silence sometimes means reflection. In his, it sometimes signals discomfort. We learned to ask instead of assume. "What are you thinking? Are you okay? Help me understand." According to relationship research, couples who ask clarifying questions during conflict have stronger long-term stability. Curiosity reduces defensiveness. Curiosity builds bridges. Slowly, our differences stopped feeling like obstacles. They became layers. I learned to appreciate his independence. He learned to value my sense of family continuity. We didn't erase our backgrounds. We expanded them. But love is not only about culture. It's also about systems. Living and working in the United States meant understanding policies, legal processes, documentation, immigration rules, health insurance, taxes. Marriage here is not only emotional, it's administrative. And that reality would soon test us. Because building a home together requires more than shared feelings. It requires shared responsibility. One evening, after discussing future plans, he looked at me seriously. If we do this, he said, we do it fully. Fully. That word echoed in my mind. Was I ready to build something fully in a country that once felt temporary? Was I ready to shift from visitor to resident in my own heart? Love had entered quietly. But commitment? Commitment demanded courage. And courage is built one honest conversation at a time. The question what makes a home was no longer theoretical. It was becoming personal. Very personal. The hard conversations. If love is warm light through a window, commitment is the foundation beneath the house. And foundations are not romantic. They are concrete, heavy, sometimes messy. The first truly hard conversation did not happen in a cafe. It happened at a kitchen counter covered in paperwork. Immigration forms. Financial statements. Health insurance options. Legal requirements for marriage in the United States. Dates. Signatures. Deadlines. Suddenly, love had fine print. In America, systems are structured. Marriage involves documentation. Tax status changes. Residency considerations. Healthcare decisions. Everything connects. It's efficient, yes, but also serious. We sat side by side reading through forms. My name looked different on official documents. Foreign. Long. Sometimes mispronounced. On paper, identity becomes very clear. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked quietly. It wasn't doubt. It was responsibility. I hesitated. Not because I didn't love him, but because I understood what this meant. Marriage would tie my life here more deeply. It would shift my legal status. It would shape my future permanently. This wasn't just romance. It was structural change. Psychologists talk about identity transition. When you move countries, you already experience one identity shift. Marriage adds another. The brain resists major change because change feels unpredictable. That resistance can show up as fear. One night, after reviewing policies and requirements for hours, I felt overwhelmed. My English felt small again. Legal vocabulary is not simple. Terms like affidavit, liability, joint assets. Even native speakers find them heavy. My chest tightened. What if I don't fully understand something? I asked. What if I make a mistake? He looked at me calmly. Then we figure it out together. Together. That word mattered more than any legal term. Research on stress regulation shows that when individuals face challenges with supportive partners, cortisol levels decrease faster. Shared stress becomes manageable stress. Still, cultural differences resurfaced. In my upbringing, marriage discussions often involve extended family opinions. Elders. Advice. Collective blessing. Here, decisions felt more private. More individual. When I mentioned wanting deeper family involvement, he listened. We can create our own version, he said. It doesn't have to follow only one model. That sentence unlocked something powerful. We weren't choosing between cultures. We were designing our own. Hard conversations continued. Finances. Would we combine accounts? Career priorities. If one of us needed to relocate, who would adjust? Children. When? How? Work-life balance in an American system that often rewards overworking. These talks were not always smooth. At times, voices rose. Not in anger, but in intensity. Love feels easy when life is abstract. It feels tested when life becomes logistical. I remember one evening when tension filled the room. We disagreed about future timelines. I worried about stability. He valued flexibility. Silence followed. In the past, silence made me anxious. But now, I stayed present. After a few minutes, he said softly, I don't want us to win arguments. I want us to win together. That sentence shifted everything. In relationship psychology, this is called a shared narrative. Couples who see themselves as a team facing external challenges tend to maintain stronger bonds. The problem becomes the opponent, not each other. We began reframing. Instead of my fear versus your plan, it became our uncertainty. Instead of your culture versus my culture, it became our future. And slowly, those heavy conversations stopped feeling like threats. They became blueprints. Blueprints are not beautiful drawings to hang on walls. They are practical maps for something that does not yet exist. We were designing a home, not just physically, but emotionally, legally, culturally. And I realized something important. A house is built with materials. A home is built with agreements. Agreements to stay. Agreements to listen. Agreements to grow. The paperwork eventually got submitted. The legal processes moved forward. But what truly strengthened us wasn't the approval stamps. It was the nights we chose honesty over comfort. It was the courage to say, I'm scared, without shame. It was the willingness to learn, not just English, but each other. And as we moved closer to marriage, I began to understand something deeper. Building a home with love is not about avoiding difficulty. It's about facing difficulty side by side. But commitment is a daily choice, not a one-time decision. And uncertainty doesn't disappear after paperwork is complete. In fact, sometimes uncertainty grows. Because after commitment comes the real question. Can we choose each other, even when life is not stable? Choosing commitment in uncertainty. There's a myth about marriage that nobody really talks about. People imagine that once you commit, everything becomes clear, stable, organized, secure. But in reality, commitment often increases uncertainty before it creates stability. After we decided to move forward legally, emotionally, fully, I expected relief. Instead, I felt something surprising, vulnerability. Because now, there was more to lose. When you are alone in a new country, your risks are personal. If you fail, you adjust. If you change direction, you pivot. But when you choose someone, truly choose them, your decisions affect another human heart. That realization made everything more serious. At the same time, work continued. Deadlines didn't pause because we were planning a life together. The American professional rhythm remained fast. Performance reviews, strategic meetings, career growth discussions. And here's the truth, building a home in the United States requires balancing two strong forces, ambition and intimacy. American culture often celebrates independence and achievement. Build your career. Follow your passion. Level up. These messages are everywhere. They're motivating, yes, but they can also quietly compete with relational stability. We felt that tension. One week, I was offered a potential opportunity in another city. Better pay. Broader exposure. But relocation would disrupt his career path. We sat down again, another long conversation. "What do you want?" he asked. I answered honestly. "I want growth. But I don't want distance." He nodded slowly. "Then we need a solution that honors both." In relationship research, there's a concept called mutual responsiveness. It means partners consider each other's needs as equally important as their own. Couples who practice this are more resilient during transitions. We decided to prioritize long-term stability over short-term gain. It wasn't the easiest decision, but it felt aligned. And that's when I understood something deeper about commitment. Commitment is not dramatic sacrifice. It is repeated alignment. Every morning, you wake up and choose the direction again. Every disagreement becomes an opportunity to reaffirm the we instead of defending the me. There were still moments of doubt. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if we were strong enough for the complexity of building a multicultural life. Would our future children feel confused about identity? Would extended families understand our choices? Would policy changes ever affect our security? Uncertainty is part of immigrant life. Even when things are stable, there's a subtle awareness that systems can shift. But here's what changed inside me. Earlier in my journey, uncertainty felt like loneliness. Now, uncertainty felt shared. There's a powerful psychological shift that happens when stress becomes collective. Instead of asking, "Can I handle this?" you ask, "Can we handle this?" And that question is lighter. One evening, we were walking through a quiet neighborhood just after sunset. Porch lights glowed softly. Some houses had children's bicycles on the lawn. Others had wind chimes moving gently in the breeze. He squeezed my hand and said, almost casually, "One day, we'll have our own place like this." I looked at him and realized something simple but profound. Home was no longer a question I asked alone at night. It was a vision we were shaping together. And vision creates direction. That's when I began to redefine strength. Before, I believed strength meant independence. Surviving alone. Adapting quietly. Proving myself. Now, strength meant vulnerability. Communication. Interdependence. It meant saying, "I need you," without shame. It meant admitting, "I'm uncertain," and still choosing forward movement. From a neuroscience perspective, long-term bonding activates oxytocin pathways in the brain. Oxytocin increases trust and reduces fear responses. Over time, consistent connection literally rewires how safe you feel in the world. I could feel that shift happening. America no longer felt like a stage where I was performing competence. It began feeling like soil where we were planting something. And planting requires patience. You don't see roots immediately, but they are growing underneath. The question, "What makes a home?" was evolving again. It wasn't just love. It wasn't just legal structure. It wasn't just shared goals. It was daily choice. Daily choosing of each other, even when life was not fully predictable. Even when English still felt imperfect sometimes. Even when the future wasn't guaranteed. And as our commitment deepened, we took the next practical step. We started looking not just at abstract dreams, but at actual spaces. Spaces where a life could unfold. Because eventually, love asks a very concrete question. Where will we build this? Building a home, not just a house. Looking at houses is dangerous when you're in love. You start imagining futures in empty rooms. You picture children running down hallways that don't belong to you yet. You stand in a kitchen and suddenly see holidays, laughter, arguments, apologies, late-night talks. But open houses are quiet. Clean. Neutral. They don't show real life. They show potential. The first house we visited was small. 2 bedrooms. A modest yard. The paint was slightly faded. The wooden floors creaked when we walked across them. "This could work," he said. I walked into the living room and closed my eyes for a second. And something strange happened. I didn't imagine furniture. I imagined conversations. Because by then, I understood something I didn't know when I first moved to America. A house is structure. A home is atmosphere. You can rent structure. You must build atmosphere. Buying property in the United States is not simple. Credit scores. Down payments. Mortgage rates. Inspections. Contracts. Every step involves numbers and negotiations. It's practical. It's rational. And yet, underneath the spreadsheets, there's emotion. We sat at a bank office one afternoon discussing loan options. The financial advisor explained interest percentages and long-term commitments. 30 years. That number felt enormous. 30 years is not just a financial decision. It's a life decision. I thought about my first lonely winter. The silent apartment. The question I kept asking myself, what makes a home? Back then, I thought home would appear once everything was stable. Now I realized stability is built, not found. We decided to move forward. The process was stressful. There were unexpected repair issues during inspection. Negotiations felt tense. At one point, I wondered if we were rushing. Are we ready? I asked again. He looked at me and smiled softly. We're not buying perfection. We're building a life. That sentence grounded me. Psychologists say humans are meaning-making creatures. We don't just want security, we want purpose. Buying a house without shared intention can feel empty. But building a home with aligned values creates deeper satisfaction. The day we received the keys, I remembered the first set of keys I held years earlier. Back then, they felt cold. Symbolic, but hollow. These felt different. Not because the metal changed. Because I had changed. We stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't huge. But it was ours. We didn't immediately fill it with expensive furniture. We moved slowly. One couch. One table. Simple curtains. Instead of rushing to decorate, we focused on rhythm. Cooking dinner together. Inviting friends over. Sitting on the floor sometimes because we didn't yet have enough chairs. Research on happiness consistently shows that shared experiences contribute more to long-term fulfillment than material upgrades. The brain remembers emotional intensity more than object details. And those early evenings in our simple living room felt intense, in a quiet way. We created small traditions. Sunday morning coffee in the backyard. Friday night walks around the neighborhood. Phone calls to family from the kitchen, blending accents and time zones. Slowly, the house began to absorb us. Our laughter. Our disagreements. Our compromises. At one point, we had a small argument about where to place a bookshelf. It sounds insignificant. But placement meant visibility. And visibility meant priority. That's when I understood something subtle. Building a home requires negotiation at every level, even small ones. Where do we place the table? How do we handle chores? What rules matter? What can we let go? In American culture, individual space is important. Personal corners. Personal routines. I learned to respect that. He learned to embrace shared rituals more deeply. We weren't merging identities. We were weaving them. One evening, after months of living there, I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. The window was open. Warm air drifted in. I could hear him in the living room talking softly on the phone. And suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt during my first year in America. Exhale. Not survival. Not performance. Just presence. Home, I realized, is the place where your nervous system relaxes. Where you don't rehearse sentences before speaking. Where you can be silent without being misunderstood. But life doesn't pause once you buy a house. In fact, sometimes it accelerates. Because soon, the conversation shifted again. From our house to our future. And that future would include more than just two people. Because building a home often leads to a deeper question. Who else will live inside this love? Family, children, and belonging. There is a moment when a house changes forever. It's not when you paint the walls. It's not when you finally buy the right sofa. It's not even when you host your first holiday dinner. It's when you realize the space is no longer only about you. When we started talking about having children, the air in our home shifted. The conversations became softer, but also deeper. Are we ready? I asked. He smiled. Is anyone ever completely ready? Fair point. Raising children in the United States comes with its own cultural layers. Independence is encouraged early. Kids are taught to express opinions, ask questions, challenge ideas respectfully. Schools emphasize participation, confidence, voice. In my upbringing, respect often meant listening first, speaking later. Harmony mattered. Authority was rarely questioned directly. So we had another series of slow conversations. If we had children, how would we raise them? Would they speak more than one language? How would we explain cultural identity? How would we teach resilience in a fast-paced society? Research shows that children in multicultural families often develop stronger cognitive flexibility. Exposure to multiple perspectives strengthens problem-solving skills. But it also requires intentional guidance. Identity doesn't automatically integrate, it needs nurturing. The day we found out we were expecting, everything felt both fragile and powerful at the same time. I remember standing in our bathroom, holding the test in my hand, heart beating faster than usual. The house felt suddenly alive. As if the walls understood something before we did. When I told him, he didn't speak immediately. He just hugged me. And in that silence, I felt something profound. Belonging. Not because of paperwork. Not because of property ownership. But because love had expanded. Pregnancy changed how I experienced the house. I noticed details differently. The stairs felt steeper. The kitchen felt warmer. The spare room transformed from extra space into future nursery. We painted that room together. Soft neutral colors. Nothing extravagant. Just calm. One evening, while assembling a small crib, he laughed and said, "This is more complicated than the mortgage process." We both laughed. But underneath the humor was truth. Building furniture requires instructions. Building family requires intention. In American healthcare systems, prenatal care is structured and systematic. Appointments. Screenings. Insurance coverage details. Everything documented carefully. I appreciated the organization. But I also missed having extended family physically nearby. There were moments when I longed for familiar voices, familiar comfort. Yet, something beautiful happened. Neighbors brought small gifts. Coworkers sent supportive messages. Friends offered advice. Community began forming organically. Sociologists explain that modern family structures often rely on chosen community rather than only biological proximity. In many American neighborhoods, friendships become extended family. And slowly, I stopped feeling like an outsider. The day our child was born, time felt suspended. Hospitals in the U.S. are efficient. Nurses move confidently. Doctors communicate clearly. Everything is monitored. But when I held that tiny human in my arms, none of the systems mattered. What mattered was warmth. Tiny fingers. Soft breathing. New life. And in that hospital room, I understood the title of this journey more clearly than ever. I built a home with love. Not perfectly. Not without fear. Not without cultural negotiation. But intentionally. Bringing a child into the world intensified everything. Sleep deprivation. Financial planning. Time management. Work-life balance in America can be demanding. Parental leave policies vary. Childcare decisions are complex. There were nights when we were exhausted. Moments when tension returned. Disagreements about routines. About discipline. About priorities. But something had shifted permanently. We were no longer building for ourselves. We were modeling belonging. Children learn emotional regulation by observing adults. When parents communicate calmly, even during stress, children internalize safety. When parents show affection openly, children develop secure attachment. So we tried, not to be perfect, but to be consistent. Some evenings, I would sit in the living room holding our child, speaking softly in English and sometimes in my native language. Simple sentences. Gentle stories. And I realized something quietly beautiful. My English no longer felt like survival. It felt like inheritance. Language became a bridge, not just between cultures, but between generations. The house that once echoed with silence now echoed with small laughter, soft cries, gentle lullabies. And in those sounds, the answer became clearer. Home is where love multiplies. But even with joy, life still brings pressure. Financial adjustments. Career growth decisions. Fatigue. The question wasn't over. Because building a home is not a one-time achievement. It's a daily practice. And to sustain it, I had to understand something deeper about resilience. The science of small daily practice. Here's something nobody tells you about building a home, or a life. It's not the big milestones that shape you the most. It's the tiny daily repetitions. After our child was born, life became beautifully chaotic. Sleep came in fragments. Work didn't slow down. Bills still arrived. Emails still needed replies. And now, a small human depended on us completely. Romantic ideas about having it all together disappeared quickly. Instead, we entered what I call the season of small habits. Small conversations. Small acts of patience. Small repairs after small arguments. And interestingly, this is where science becomes very practical. Neuroscience shows that the brain changes through repetition, not intensity. This process is called neuroplasticity. You don't rewire your identity through one emotional speech. You rewire it through consistent behavior. That applies to relationships. And it applies to language learning. In the early days in America, I thought I needed dramatic transformation to feel at home. Perfect English. Major achievements. Big breakthroughs. But building a family taught me something different. Progress is quiet. For example, every night we created a small ritual. No matter how tired we were, we spent 10 minutes talking, not about logistics, not about schedules, but about feelings. What felt heavy today? What felt good? Is there anything we need to adjust? 10 minutes. Research from relationship expert Dr. John Gottman suggests that couples who engage in daily emotional check-ins maintain stronger long-term satisfaction. It's not about solving everything. It's about staying connected. Those 10 minutes became our anchor. Some nights, the conversation was light. Other nights, it was raw. But it was consistent. And consistency builds trust. At the same time, I continued practicing English, but differently than before. Instead of long study sessions, I focused on small daily storytelling. I described my day out loud while washing dishes. I narrated simple routines. I'm preparing dinner. Today was challenging. I felt proud when. This method aligns with research on contextual language acquisition. When vocabulary is tied to real-life context and emotion, retention improves significantly. I wasn't memorizing random phrases anymore. I was integrating language into life. And something subtle happened. English stopped feeling like a task. It became a tool for connection. One evening, while sitting on the couch after putting our child to sleep, I looked around the room. Toys on the floor. A blanket folded imperfectly. Soft lamplight. It wasn't Instagram perfect. But it was peaceful. And peace, I realized, is a trained skill. Psychologists describe resilience not as toughness, but as recovery speed. The faster you can return to emotional balance after stress, the more resilient you are. Daily rituals increase recovery speed. Small apologies increase recovery speed. Small gratitude statements increase recovery speed. I appreciate you. Thank you for handling that. I know today was hard. These sentences are simple. But they are structural beams in a house of love. There were still challenges. Financial planning in America requires foresight. Saving for education. Health insurance adjustments. Retirement contributions. Systems don't pause just because you're tired. But instead of feeling alone in responsibility, I felt partnered. And that changed my internal narrative. Earlier in my journey, I asked, "Can I survive here?" Now I asked, "How can we thrive here?" Thriving doesn't mean constant happiness. It means intentional growth. Some days, growth looked like patience when we were exhausted. Some days, growth looked like asking for help. Some days, growth looked like laughing at ourselves. And slowly, the answer to the big question began to crystallize. What makes a home? Not square footage. Not salary level. Not flawless communication. It's repeated care. It's the decision to show up, even when imperfect. It's the ability to repair when things crack. Our home wasn't built in one dramatic moment. It was built in thousands of small ones. And those small moments accumulated into something solid. Something warm. Something real. But clarity often comes only after reflection. And one quiet evening, as I stood in the doorway watching my family in the living room, I finally understood something that had taken years to learn. Home was never something I was searching for outside. It was something I was constructing from within. And that realization would change how I defined everything. The day I stopped being afraid. There was a day I will never forget. It was not a big stage. Not an important exam. Not a perfect moment. It was ordinary. And maybe that is why it mattered so much. Someone asked me to share my opinion in English. In front of other people. My first reaction was fear. My hands felt cold. My chest felt tight. My mind started whispering. What if you make mistakes? What if they don't understand you? What if you sound stupid? Maybe you know those thoughts. They come quickly. They sound convincing. But that day, something was different. Instead of listening to fear, I listened to something else. A quieter voice. It said, "You have practiced. You have improved. You are ready enough. Not perfect, but ready enough." So I stood up. I took a slow breath. And I began speaking. My voice was not strong at first. It trembled a little. I searched for words. I paused between sentences. But I did not stop. And something unexpected happened. People listened. Not because my English was perfect, but because my message was real. I realized something powerful in that moment. People care more about meaning than about mistakes. They care about connection. They care about sincerity. And sincerity does not require perfect grammar. It requires courage. When I finished speaking, there was a small silence. Then someone nodded. Another person smiled. And one person said, "Thank you." That was clear. Clear. Not perfect. Clear. That word stayed with me. Clear is enough. You do not need to impress. You need to express. Let's repeat that. You do not need to impress. You need to express. Say it slowly. Again. Good. That day, I understood that fear does not disappear before action. Fear disappears during action. The moment you begin speaking, fear starts losing power. The moment you try, fear starts shrinking. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is speaking while your voice shakes. And you are building courage every time you practice. Every time you repeat a sentence. Every time you finish a lesson. Every time you continue instead of quitting. You may not see it yet, but your fear is already smaller than before. Think about it. Months ago, maybe listening to English felt impossible. Now you are here. Still listening. Still understanding. Still growing. That is bravery. It is about identity. You are no longer someone who wants to learn English. You are someone who is learning English. There is a difference. One is a wish. The other is a decision. And you have decided. Even if you do not say it out loud. You show it through action. And action builds identity. From today, try this. When someone asks, "Are you good at English?" Do not say, "No, I'm bad." Say, "I'm improving." Simple. Honest. Powerful. Because that is the truth. You are improving. Every minute you stay here. Every sentence you understand. Every word you speak, even imperfectly. You are becoming someone braver. Someone clearer. Someone more confident. And soon, very soon, we will reach the final part of this journey. But before that, take a breath. Feel the difference between who you were and who you are now. It may be small, but it is real. And real growth is the kind that lasts. Let's prepare for the final chapter. It's closer than you think. The person you are becoming. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself 1 year from now. You are in a conversation. Maybe at work. Maybe while traveling. Maybe meeting someone new. And you are speaking English. Not perfectly, but naturally. You are not translating every word. You are not panicking inside. You are present. You are calm. You are yourself. That version of you is not imaginary. That version of you is being built right now. In moments like this. In quiet practice sessions. In slow repetition. In patient listening. Transformation does not happen in one dramatic day. It happens in small, invisible layers. Like water shaping stone. Soft. Consistent. Unstoppable. Think about the person you were when you first started. Maybe you doubted yourself. Maybe you felt far behind. Maybe you were afraid of judgment. And now? You understand longer stories. You stay focused for extended time. You reflect in English. That is not small. That is powerful. There is something beautiful about long journeys. They change your identity. You didn't just learn vocabulary. You learned discipline. You didn't just practice pronunciation. You practiced patience. You didn't just improve listening. You strengthened resilience. English was the tool. But growth was the real result. Let that sink in. You are stronger now. Not because everything became easy, but because you kept going when it was hard. That is the quiet victory. And here is the truth. There will still be difficult days. Moments of confusion. Moments of hesitation. Moments when you feel slow again. That is normal. Even advanced speakers have those days. But the difference now is this. You no longer run from discomfort. You walk through it. Calmly. Steadily. With awareness. Because you know something important. Progress is not dramatic. It is consistent. You showed up. You stayed. You finished this journey. That says everything. Right now, wherever you are. Take one deep breath. Inhale slowly. Exhale gently. And say this. I did not quit. Again. I did not quit. That sentence is bigger than English. It is about who you are becoming. A person who continues. A person who grows. A person who chooses courage over comfort. And this is not the end. It is a new beginning. From today, when you listen to English, you will hear differently. When you speak, you will feel differently. Because now you understand. Fluency is not speed. Confidence is not perfection. Growth is not instant. It is steady. And you are steady. Thank you for staying through this story. Thank you for trusting the process. Thank you for believing, even a little bit, that you can do this. Because you can. And you are. The journey continues beyond this moment. Beyond this video. Beyond this lesson. And wherever it takes you. Remember this feeling. You started. You struggled. You continued. You grew. That is your story. And it is only just beginning. And now, before you leave this video, I want you to pause for just a second. You didn't just listen to a story. You practiced. You focused. You stayed. That already separates you from most people. This is not just slow English listening practice. This is not just English story for learning. This is the moment you decided to grow. Somewhere in the future, there is a version of you speaking confidently, clearly, and naturally. And that version of you is built in moments like this. Quiet. Consistent. Intentional. But here's the truth most people don't realize. Fluency is not a single breakthrough. It's a series of small decisions. And you just made one. Now imagine what happens if you keep going. What if you listen every day? What if you speak without fear? What if you trust the process? That's exactly what this channel is built for. On this channel, you will continue to train your brain with Slow English Listening Practice 2026. Speak English confidently and naturally. Learn English through story. Improve English fluency step by step. And the next story? It will challenge you differently. It will go deeper. It might even surprise you. So if you're serious about transforming your English in 2026, don't let this be the last step. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. And join a community that chooses growth over fear. Because the next level of your English is closer than you think. And I'll see you in the next story.